It is no secret to anyone who knows me that one of my favorite things is paying respect to media that's often derided by others as being of low quality or is viewed primarily through an ironic lens. I think it's important to give every game, song, movie, and drawing its due and fair respect, and to try and find the meaning in other people's hard work. There are obviously some works that are just kinda terrible, but I think there's far more out there that just gets an unfairly bad rep, and dating sims are one of the key examples of this in my mind. You could write an entire video essay about the way they've been perceived by Western gamers, but you know what? I think they're neat. From the countless games that have been influenced by them, to the otome subgenre that helped to get many women into gaming, and just the inherently personal nature of a romantically driven plot, there's a lot of value in what the genre has to offer. And one of the finest examples of the genre that I can think of is Welcome to Pia Carrot, released in 1996 by Cocktailsoft for the NEC PC98 home computer and ported to the PCFX 1 year later, an ill-conceived console with a fascinating history and a fascinating library of games. It was NEC's attempt at competing with the PlayStation and Saturn as their older PC Engine line died out, focusing exclusively on FMV and 2D capabilities, which, if you remember the aesthetic that most games on those systems went for, isn't what people wanted at the time. Gorgeous sprite work and animation? Nah, fuck that. Give me that gorgeous 3D aesthetic. It only takes one glance at the sales and game library numbers to understand just how much this system flopped, but if you ask me, I feel it deserved far better than that, and certainly far better than the poor reputation it's garnered now, as despite its shortcomings, and there are a lot of them, there are a number of genuinely fascinating and neat titles that make the platform worth giving a look, and goddamn will I shell Pia Carrot is exactly that. Much like the console itself becoming ingrained in my memory as a young girl watching old anime and videos on obscure imported retro games in shitty 240p quality on early YouTube, this game became lodged in my brain when I was a teenager watching old anime in 360p quality, and it refused to leave, remaining as a vague, foggy memory that'd be reinvigorated every few years as I'd see the PCFX mentioned on various corners of the internet. And that just so happened to occur again a few weeks back when I was already in the mood to start reading a new VN, and oh boy, while it may seem on the surface to be one in a sea of forgettable 90s eroge, Pia Carrot stands out amongst the crowd. I won't pretend it's the most in-depth thing ever made or that it's a masterpiece of writing, but what scenario writer Inamura Ryuichi was able to accomplish with the game's small scope is equal parts heartwarming, intimate, personal, and painful in a way that I wasn't expecting at all going in. The story is simple enough on the surface. It centers around 18-year-old Yusuke Kinoshita, an easygoing, aimless boy fresh out of high school graduation, looking forward to partying and enjoying his last summer break before he has to decide his future, to go to college or to take over his father's cafe that he has no interest in. But a lost bet with him over subpar grades means he has to spend a good chunk of his summer break working there anyways. As you can probably guess by the genre, that cafe is where Yusuke, and by extension the player, will end up learning more about and potentially dating one of the 8 heroines, the sweet and kind Shoko, the sorta tsundere Satomi, the stern boss Shiho, the orderly and pristine Yukiko, the stylish and flirty Reika, the reserved Saori, the teacher Kiyomi, and the shy Yukari. Out of your friends, which one are you? It's a cute and simple premise, which is a big part of the game's charm to me. There's no underlying fantasy element or plot devices, there's nobody with unrelatable or outlandish problems. It's just a kind guy, his family, and some cute girls that are all interesting from the moment you meet them, but become more and more complex the more you talk with them, all tied together by a neat little cafe. The simple premise is matched well with a generally lighthearted atmosphere. Even if the cafe Pia Carrot is kept sparkly clean and pretty every day, it doesn't mean there aren't shenanigans to be had there or that the staff doesn't have fun sometimes. Whether that's Yusuke bantering of Shoko and Satomi, his close childhood friends, his little sister Rumi showing up for a quick bite and making him pay, going on a summer vacation to Okinawa with the gang to get away from work, or stopping by Komiket and finding one of your coworkers there, the game keeps the rather short length of each route fresh with all these little happenings and side plots. And being that this is a dating sim taking most notably after Konami's Tokimeki Memorial, the gameplay and story is purposefully structured around you replaying it over and over again to see all of these different routes, as many of them overlap with each other. Going to Komiket every morning while it's up might prevent you from saying hi to Shiho and helping her out with work before you're scheduled to come in, or telling Shoko and Satomi that you'll hang out with them will force you to say no to going out with Reika. There is absolutely no way you're seeing every single piece of content in a single run. If you want to see everything Pia Carrot has to offer, then you have to do a complete playthrough of each character's route, which isn't that big of a request, since in-game days take only between 3 and 10 minutes each, usually veering on the lower side unless that day has content unique to your current route. The gameplay here isn't just picking dialogue choices though, as in mechanics also taken from Konami's Tokimeki Memorial, you'll be doing stats building and time management as Pia Carrot tasks you to figure out what the right set of events is to keep in contact with a character over the course of 34 in-game days. They're split into 3 parts: morning, where you can go out somewhere, call someone, or study; evening, where you work unless it's a day off; and nighttime, where you're either forced to rest or will get to see some special event. Pretty much everything you do besides resting takes energy away from you, which you can only regain by resting in the morning or working certain jobs at Pia Carrot, which also happen to raise your stats and be event triggers in and of themselves. While it may sound like a lot to keep track of, and it felt like it for me on my first playthrough, side characters will always be giving you hints as to what stats you need for what routes, and the rest you can figure out simply by playing and paying attention. That did not stop my dumbass from needing a guide, however. I don't think that detracted at all from my enjoyment of the title though, because most of it came from the cast. I love every single one of the characters here. From the moment you start reading, the game wastes no time establishing their personalities, and they're all charming from the first moment. I think my favorite of the bunch is Shoko, just because of how much of a sweetheart she is. She deserves the biggest hug. She's also endearingly empty-headed sometimes, and I can really sympathize with that. Satomi is precious too. She feels like the kind of character you can just kick back with and tease over dumb shit, just like a good childhood friend. I could go over everybody, but my point is the writing in general does such a good job at making you care about everyone as much as the main character does, even the side characters. Kaori, the old lady who helps Yusuke wash dishes, is a blast whenever she's around with her goofy-ass anecdotes and love for seeing romance blossom. The MC's younger sister, Rumi, God, Rumi is just a fucking queen. I love their playfully antagonistic relationship and how their dad is just the chillest of guys. Like, look at this man. This man is fucking comfy. What elevates Pia Carrot even further, however, is how it uses its tried and true gameplay structure to force you to re-examine common dialogue and events that you'll inevitably see. Maybe you'll read Satomi being embarrassed by a compliment the first time as her just being a typical tsundere, but reading her route and then going back to another will have you reading that same line and walking away with a completely different interpretation. It really helps flesh out the characters without even adding additional words to the script. Seeing a character in a casual, non-romantic setting after spending the last hour or two getting to know everything about them and having Yusuke pursue a relationship with them leads to a lot of interesting discoveries about their actions throughout the events common to each route, and I fucking love it! Piecing together a character's motivations and troubles just through added context is as rewarding as learning how to navigate their route. Some characters are better about this than others. Salary, Kiyomi, and particularly Yukiko only show up once or twice if you aren't pursuing them, but for the most part, the game makes rereading and re-examining relevant dialogue worthwhile, and thus keeping repeat playthroughs from being nothing but skipping text. Though there is still a fair bit of that, and if you're playing with a mouse like I was, there's no easy way to just skip through tons of text in bulk. But this does lead into what I think are the biggest strengths in the Pia Carrot's storytelling, the way it uses its lighthearted atmosphere to contrast with the deeper, more emotional elements of the cast, and the way the gameplay structure helps to accentuate them, and I don't think there's any character that exemplifies this better than Reika Kokubo. She is the only cast member that actively and openly tries to flirt with Yusuke, approaching him after work, calling him to get his attention, and hitting on him during daily activities, as the rest of the cast besides Shoko, who initially appears to be more of a klutzy girl unaware of how she's coming off, stays pretty romantically ambivalent to him if not being actively pursued. And there is a reason for this. If you choose to go after her, like I did on my first playthrough, then things start out as wholesome as the rest of the game tends to be. Yusuke gets to go out for food with her, spend hours waiting around while she clothes shops, be flirted with on the job, and it's all genuinely really cute and sweet stuff in that vein. But then something changes. After a few days of basically non-stop arrow scenes following the two getting used to each other, she becomes almost completely unavailable, running away from Yusuke when he comes to work, leaving early, refusing to answer the phone, and being seen in the park alone at night muttering self-hate while there isn't any action you as a player can take to do a single thing about it. At this point, even if you haven't been through any other route, you've spent enough time with her to get to know her as a genuinely kind person, someone who is always there to talk and is happy to have the company of the person she loves, so it makes this sudden period of silence one of the most unnerving experiences I've had in a game. But that silence does get broken in the last week and a half of her playthrough. Walking back home one night, Yusuke spots her again at the park, and this time she opens up. Unable to face him while talking, she explains that she had just broken up with a man who she cared little for, and that she was only with because it felt like it was a necessity for her to be with somebody. Around this time, Yusuke started working at Pia Carrot, and so she jumped at the chance to be with another person, any person, hopes that would stop her from feeling lonely and pain, that the warmth of another person would solve all of her problems, even if she didn't love them and saw them only as a toy. But instead, it just created more. That loneliness stayed, and now accompanying it, the guilt of using another person for her own selfish needs, and unknowing of how to deal with those feelings, she just went back to being alone. Of course there's a happy ending to all of this. Yusuke forgives her, and over the course of the last week of gameplay, she starts to recover from those feelings of self-hates and genuinely, truly starts smiling again. And that happy and optimistic ending is what makes Pia Carrot, well, Pia Carrot. But what makes this sequence truly work isn't just the emotional pull that it has in the moment, it's the framing around Reika herself throughout every single route. Many events that feel like they should be exclusive to her, like her trying to find you while you're on the job to flirt or stopping by the kitchen to say she loves you, will occur no matter what you do. Just as she says herself, it doesn't matter if she loves the person she's doing everything with, all that matters is that it's a person to direct affection towards. Likewise, all of the gratuitous arrow scenes that happen one after another in her route are an outlier in how this game does erotic elements, and it's entirely on purpose. They aren't the climax of an emotional arc, two lovers becoming one after a long time together and overcoming trials. They're an impulsive escape from emotions she doesn't know how to cope with. And Yusuke, hardly the type to be experienced in relationships and other people's emotions, unknowingly believes this is a genuine expression of love, when in reality it's an act of desperation from a hopelessly depressed and hurt person, broken by the pressures of society to be with the first man who pushes himself onto her even if that's not what she wants. Shit's fucking hard, and as someone who can safely say they've experienced none of these exact events, the core emotions touched upon here hit me in a way that very little other media has. I am someone who struggles to properly word their emotions for a number of reasons that I don't want to get into for this video, and so my default over the years has simply become to shut down and hide, or put on a pretty face and pretend everything is okay. And as silly as it might sound, this 25-year-old arrow game that no one but me and a handful of other people have even heard about, let alone read all the way through, is one of the few times I've ever seen this kind of emotional complexity I deal with reflected in media, and it feels, well, cathartic. While the game can't explore this and its other themes as deeply as a big, highly budgeted title like a Little Busters or Clanhead, I frankly don't think it needs to, and I think it hits as hard as it does because of how little time the game gets to dwell. Many of my big revelations about myself and emotions came through long periods of silence and deliberation, with one notable but ultimately not huge event, in which I was able to speak earnestly for a short time with someone close to me about how I felt. Reika's route perfectly reflects this, and I can't imagine it being any better if it were given a few thousand more words. Of course, the game explores far more than just the feelings of one girl. There is a running theme of rejecting one's own feelings going throughout the game. Shoko plays her genuine feelings off in a wishy-washy way, Satomi refuses to acknowledge her love for fear of destroying her friendship, Saori is bashful and isolatory to avoid confronting her own undeserved self-hate, Yukiko puts on a front around everyone for fear she would be hated if she showed her true self, and Shiho hides her unhappiness with her love life behind the front of a stern person dedicated to her job. Nothing hit me quite as hard as Reika, but I would be lying if I said that Shoko's route didn't get me thinking, or that a select few moments in Saori's route didn't hit me like a goddamn truck. It also really helps the story a lot that Yusuke is a genuinely likable protagonist. While there are some questionable choices here and there, the actual good and neutral choices to dialogue that don't penalize you and lock you out of routes are almost all really respectful, or at least something okay to say, and that extends to a surprisingly good understanding of consent. Yusuke is just a decent, honest guy, and even when he's a dumb, horny teenager, he keeps it to himself and isn't degrading. Frankly, it's kind of amusing just how much the writers seem to take issue with typical chauvinistic male leads. There's these little games and comics you can play and read sometimes during downtime in the morning, and one of them has a parody ultimate game where you can have the lead girl hook up with either one of these shallow guys, and no matter which one you pick, she just socks them into space for being assholes. Well, I feel that eroge as a whole gets a far worse rep than it deserves. There isn't denying that a lot of the games are hugely problematic, so seeing a title, let alone such an early one, that is both aware of this and seeks to do better, I think is worth commending and recognizing. That's not to say the game is absolutely perfect in terms of writing. The biggest flaw by far is the lack of content for some characters. While I wish Saori got more than she did, what she has ranges from good to some of the best content in the game, but then there's Yukiko, the shy shut-in who gets fucking nothing in terms of characterization. Poor girl really deserved more. And, well, then there's the eroge elements themselves, because as much as I can lavish the story in place for how brilliant Reika's route is, or that one particular moment in Saori's route that pierced straight through my heart, there are still some times where it feels like horny bits are shoehorned in there just kind of for the sake of being there. The way in which the game so perfectly uses or simply excludes arrow scenes in some routes makes the very average way in which they're inserted in a couple of others feel out of place. And the same goes for the odd joke and just tiny idiosyncrasies here and there that you just have to chalk up to being quirks of trying to market to a specific audience. I will give Cocktail Soft props though for making Rumi's relationship to Yusuke completely familial. There's actually a whole route's worth of content just for her, and it's all really cute and wholesome stuff that I absolutely just love, and it's definitely worth seeing once you've finished every other route in the game. It is the route with the least emotional tension overall, and frankly I don't mind because it's kind of a breath of fresh air after everything else that happens in the game. Frankly, because it is so wholesome, I think it's the route that best symbolizes what Pia Carrot means to me. No matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, there are always going to be people there for you. There will always be people ready to spend time with you and to enjoy your company, to make memories that you'll hold dear forever. And the game really pushes this message home with its two bad endings. The first is what you get if you go after no one or just hang out with Rumi all month long, where you go to hang out with her for her birthday and have a good time being the big brother, which is just the cutest shit, I love it. The other bad ending is what happens if you don't call Satomi on the last night of her route and you just end up staying friends with her and Shoko, which is this is just the cutest shit. I can't get enough of how precious the art here is. In fact, the game in general is just endearing as a heck visually. I love the animations that play out for each job Yusuke performs at Pia Carrot or when he studies or rests. I love how every character's sprite perfectly reflects their personality and demeanor, and the fashion, oh my god, the casual outfits that each character wears when not at work revel in stylized averageness. I love Shoko's pretty yellow cardigan with the plain white shirt underneath. I love Rumi's cute and playful little bows. I love Yukiko's, oh holy shit, Yukiko has some drip. It's impressive how even in its fashion, the game still keeps the aesthetic of a normal, relatable scenario going. Like, I'm pretty sure I could throw half of these outfits together just with what I have in my dinky-ass apartment closet and a quick trip to a Goodwill. I love it. I suppose now is a good time to mention the PCFX version here is more or less a direct adaptation of the original PC98 version's artworks, and I really couldn't tell you which version I prefer. The 98 version is just fucking gorgeous and vibrant and makes fantastic use of the platform's trademark dithering, while the FX version does away with that in favor of more shading and coloring on the art. There are some places where I feel one does better than the other. The sheer level of vibes in this salary CG in the 98 version are off the charts, and the PCFX just can't hit as hard, but I love how the sprites look in the FX version more in general. It's a tough call. I wish I could say this game was as strong musically as it is artistically, but it's likely the game's weakest link. That isn't to say the score is bad, far from it. Pretty much every tune is perfectly fit for where it plays, and there are some real boppers here and there, but with only 17 minutes of music to go around for a game that can take upwards of 10 hours to see everything in, I quickly found myself wishing there was more music here. It's also seriously compressed due to the amount of space available on the CD being limited. With most of it being taken up by voice acting, all of the music had to be squished down to glorious mono at what sounds like 11 kilohertz. Though I couldn't tell you if that's a good or bad thing, since I think it fits with the crusty, very obviously made on a cheap-ass synthesizer aesthetic of the music. It's kind of adorable. It really helps with lending the game a charmingly budgeted feel, the kind that makes me feel all fuzzy for the days of yore, where games like this could be thrown onto retail shelves with little regard as to whether or not it would be appealing to the mass market, which I think is perfectly in line with what the PCFX itself was doing. I would be remiss if I didn't give the tunes themselves their due respect though. Like I said, there's some real boppers here, and there's even a really nice leitmotif that's repeated in a number of the tracks, which helps to tie everything together. The voice acting as well deserves some serious props. Every VA here really sells their character and delivers a great performance. I can't say if Pia Carrot did or didn't grow an audience beyond the kind of crowd that would already be interested in a title like this, but it at least did well enough to warrant a number of sequels, an OVA, and a censored port to the Sega Saturn with some additional content, which has some of the crunkiest music I've heard on this system, and art that's just off enough to be noticeable and make me feel uncomfortable. It's entirely untranslated, so unless you know Japanese, then there's no reason to even try it out. In fact, the only translated version of this game is the FX release, and that's why I've been playing it for most of this video. This was done all the way back in 2009 by David Michael and Filler, who did a bang-up job at getting this game into English. I did encounter a few visual bugs while playing that I'm sure you've probably noticed while watching the video, but I'm 99% certain these are from my using Mednafen to emulate this game rather than playing it on real hardware. As much as I prefer not using emulation for the subjects of my videos, it pains me to say that I am but a poor Ohioan woman who does not have $300 to drop on a PCFX on an eBay listing conveniently linked in the description right now. This is a cue to donate to my Patreon. If I get $150 every month, then I'll buy that PCFX conveniently linked in the description. I did briefly consider trying to insert the translated script into the PC98 game, but it's just sufficiently esoteric enough in how it stores its text to dissuade my completely code-unknowledgeable brain from attempting the translation. That said, I did find out it runs on the same ADV98 engine as Dead of the Brain and some other PC98 VNs, so if any prospecting hackers want to toy around with editing the game's text and making Shoko say fuck, then there's already some documentation out there. If you want some more Pia Carrot content that can be understood without a degree in Japanese or computer engineering, then may I not suggest the 1997 OVA of the same name? Anime adaptations of eroge weren't uncommon in the 90s. Elf and Alicesoft both saw a fair share of their titles adapted into video form, though the fruits of those labors aren't really remembered as being good. Studio PP Project's adaptation of Yuno in particular is remembered for how it attempted to poorly cram 45 hours worth of text into 2 hours worth of animation, and likewise, Pia Carrot attempts to cram a narrative tightly woven around its visual novel structure into less than half an hour worth of video. Does it work? Well, no, not really. It takes what is very decidedly not a normal eroge and turns it into the most normal hentai OVA to ever exist for 5 minutes, and then attempts to cram the dark emotional elements of the story into the subtlety of a fucking freight train the next. Rather than focusing on one specific route, it's basically a combination of Reika, Shoko, Satomi, and Shiho into a single plot, with key events of each route placed throughout. If you're wondering where the rest of the cast is, Yukiko, Yukari, and Saori are all conspicuously absent, Kiyomi is reduced entirely to eye candy, and side characters cease to exist. Except for Rumi, who's given a surprising amount of screen time and is a treat anytime she's on screen, especially around Shoko. I was surprised at how well the characterization of these two was carried over here, even if no one else really was cleanly. Shiho has no personality now outside of being a generic anime mom, and Satomi is much more aggressive than in the VN, though she's still great. I also love how Yusuke's dad is given more character here. He's just a dude you can vibe and talk about anything with while he's busy designing cute as shit and surprising respectful maid outfits. I love him. I wish I could be as nice to Yusuke as I can to him, however, he's the character who is hit absolutely the worst by the adaptation changes stick. They took a genuinely good guy and turned him into the most generic hentai protagonist possible, a guy who just wants to stare at panties and grab booba all day. I think it's less bad here than in a lot of shows with perverted main characters, since there's very few instances where the cast doesn't play along with his antics and enjoy bullying him for it, but it still just feels weird. Reika also got completely screwed in the transition from game to anime, and I think that's mostly because her character needs a protagonist who's dedicated specifically to being with her and seeing her troubles through in order to work. In the OVA, she just exists to be a quick blink in the first episode, set up some dramatic tension in the second that culminates in the park scene, and then she just disappears. Her climactic scene doesn't even play all the way through, it just fades to back after her confession. It is some of the most bizarre tomfuckery I've ever witnessed, and though at least it doesn't keep the OVA from being a fun watch at points. Like I said, the antics that Rumi, Shoko, and Satomi are involved in are a ton of fun, even when the melodrama surrounding them is contrived, and the animation is shockingly really fun. You can tell they were working on a shoestring budget here and did everything they could to mask it by just being goofy, and it works really well. I love all the silly facial expressions the characters make, and the distance drawings are just fucking gold. I spend most of my time watching the show just smiling at how silly they look. This OVA is a train wreck, but it's a fun train wreck, and one that I can't wholly say I don't recommend, even if it is a poor representation of the story it's based on. As for the original Pia Carrot, well, I talked about it for nearly half an hour with nothing but words of praise, but that should tell you something about how I feel about it. I fucking love it. Going in, I was expecting a fun, cozy ride with little to report on, something worth spending a few hours on, but not particularly memorable. And what I ended up with was what I would consider one of the most enjoyable visual novels that I've read, with a heartwarming and touching story, great wholesome vibes, and a colorful cast of characters that I grew attached to by the end. Obtaining a copy of the translated version may prove a bit difficult, as PCFX emulation is currently just fine where it stands, and it does take some time to get this up and running, but I believe it's completely worth the effort to experience everything Pia Carrot has to offer. If you have the means to play it, then absolutely do, because I don't think any fan of the genre, or heck, even people who are just casually interested, will regret having checked it out.